So, a really warm welcome to this series of webinars on this question of what does it mean to live life well? And what we're doing is over 12 steps or milestones, exploring sort of foundational stones, if you like, to a life well lived, starting with an invitation to step out of habit and automaticity, to really kind of wake up to our lives. And from that place to begin to pay attention with a quality of intention, alignment with our values. And then in the last webinar, what we explored was this idea of coming home to our bodies. And there we began this idea of beginning to do that with a sense of appreciation, a sense of befriending the body. And the theme of today is a theme of appreciation. And what I want to do is really unpack this idea of what it means to live with a sense of appreciation. And I'll start with a story. A friend of mine was somebody who I got to know who lived her life with a real sense of, I'm going to say joie de vivre, a real sense of engagement, a real sense of um, always out with friends, always talking about her work in a way that was kind of hopeful and optimistic. And what was extraordinary about her was that she was a senior nurse working in a form of palliative care where people had typically less than a year to live. And I said to her, how is it that you can have this sense of joy, this sense of light, when the work you do is really so challenging and your life seems so full? And she just didn't even pause. She didn't miss a beat. She just said, you know what? I find beauty in the muddle. I find beauty in the muddle. And of course, the word muddle is a sort of typically English word, isn't it? It's a word that sort of connotes the sense of messiness, this sense of a lot going on. And genuinely, that's what she did. Her life was full, her life was challenging, her life had all the same difficulties that we all encounter in our lives, and perhaps many more given the work that she did. But she was able to find beauty in the muddle. So I kind of got to thinking, what was her secret? How did she do that? And that's the theme of today, is to draw on the very best of psychological science and the very best of the wisdom traditions, if you like, about the role of appreciation. And maybe throwing this question to you, if you think back over your day so far today, is there this sense of beauty in the muddle? Is it something you can recognize from your day that's just gone? So maybe just cast your mind back over the day from the moment you woke to this moment. Were there moments of muddle? And within that muddle, within that fullness, within that busyness, was there a sense of beauty maybe being possible to see in the midst of it? So I'd like to kind of make a kind of meta point, if you like, and then break that down into 4 different ways in which we can build appreciation into our lives. And the first kind of overarching meta point, if you like, is that appreciation, I'd like to suggest to you, is something that is active. It's something that we do. It's a skill. It's a habit. It's a way of being. Most people don't, I think of appreciation in that way. And if you relate it to everything that we've talked about in the webinars so far, what I mean by appreciation as active is we're looking for, orienting towards, and savoring the beauty in the muddle, the good, the things that we can appreciate even in the midst of difficulty, as John Kabat-Zinn would put it, the whole catastrophe. And everything we've done so far is essential groundwork, the waking up, the gathering, the body as an anchor and a guide. So just going back to psychology a little bit and thinking about the way in which we make sense of the world, I think very early psychologists would articulate these ideas that, the way we see the world is maybe a little bit like a camera, or now I guess a video camera. And the way we hear and understand the world through hearing is a bit like a microphone with a sort of decoder. But I think what we've come to understand about the way we make sense of the world is it's much more like a production suite. It's much more like all of the information that we choose to pay attention to, that we are exposed to, is in some way kind of worked based on all of our previous experience and all of the habits of mind that we have. We're touching up our experience, filling in the gaps, writing stories based on all we've learned in all of our lives. William James put it this way: the mind works on data it receives as a sculptor on a block of stone. Let me say that again. It's a bit like the mind is kind of like an artist. So in the form of a sculptor, they have this block of stone and they're turning this block of stone into something out of their imagination. And I think that makes this process of appreciation, this skill, this habit, an extraordinarily creative, playful, and fun kind of endeavor, if you like. I'd like to just kind of refer a little bit to my kind of clinical work and the work of myself and others in the Oxford Mindfulness Centre over the years on depression. And historically, kind of psychological approaches to depression have been very much about helping people to recognize the kind of ways in which they're behaving, which are typically about avoidance and pulling back for very understandable reasons, or thinking in quite negative ways, and helping people to recognize those and in some way correct them, maybe engage with things which are pleasurable and rewarding, and notice their negative thinking and change that. But a former client of mine said to me the following statement, which is, that's really helpful and really important. But it seems to me the journey out of depression is more than turning away from the dark. It has to be about learning to live in the light. And you've helped me with the CBT, with the turning away from the dark, but I'm pretty clueless about how to learn to live in the light. This was somebody with a history of quite a lot of adversity in their lives. And that really struck a chord for me. And what's happened professionally for me, alongside colleagues like Barney Dunn, is this sort of recognition, and the research is bearing this out, that recovery from depression is also about helping people to learn to live in the light. And I'm going to come on to what that looks like in a moment. And crucially, what the research suggests is that when we do that, when we help people to learn to live in the light, that change helps them to have bigger improvements, larger and more sustainable recovery. And that's, I think, a real breakthrough, actually, in the psychological treatment of depression. And my own personal story is quite similar. I've never shied away from being honest about my own history of depression from my probably late teens, maybe even mid-teens. And I remember there was a turning point somewhere, probably in my late 30s, early 40s, where I started to think about depression in a different way. It was less a fear of depression, less a moving away from that kind of vortex of being sucked into somewhere really not nice at all, to moving towards something more hopeful, something more meaningful. The term that's used by Barbara Fredrickson is a sense of broadening and building, broadening and building the way we think about the world, the way we are in the world, the way we engage with the world. So appreciation is something active. It's something we can learn to do. It's something we can make a habit. It's something we can build into our lives. And when we do, it has this effect of broadening and building this sense of capacity, this sense of possibility, this sense of light. And what I'd like to suggest is that there are at least 4 ways in which appreciation can be built. The first is very much in line with the theme of my new book, Mindfulness for Life, which is really building it into our day and our life, making a habit out of appreciating our experiences wholeheartedly with a sense of gladdening our heart, brightening our mind, and coming home to our body. Now, if that sounds a bit abstract, let me make that really quite concrete. I live in England, and we are at the moment in 5 days away from the shortest day of the year, which means I get up in the dark. I go to work in the dark. I come home in the dark, and it's pretty cold and damp and often quite rainy. Be very easy to have a sense of darkness and a sense of dampening from that experience. And I think the weather is a really interesting way of illustrating this idea of appreciation becoming a habit. I sometimes have learned to say to myself, and perhaps annoyingly to others, the only way to really live in England at a time like this is to think of the weather not as being problematic, but actually the equipment we have, the clothes we have, and the attitude we have is what makes it problematic. Now that may sound a bit Pollyannish, but I work at this desk here, and on my right is a window, and outside of that window is a tree. And as I sit working here throughout the day, there is so much happening with the weather and the seasons. And even at this time of the year, when I look out at the tree outside my window, just a very garden variety London tree, it is extraordinary that even now, in the middle of December, the tree is beginning to bud. There is something happening inside of this tree that has no leaves in the middle of the winter. There is a life that is just fermenting and is getting ready for the spring. I can choose to see that. I can choose not to see that. And as I choose to look at that, I'm getting to know the different animals that live in that tree, the different varieties of bird and squirrel and so on. And I can even recognize them from the day. So one of the things that we do with this sense of appreciation and building it into our day is also thinking of our senses as being a bit like the sort of elements of an orchestra. So I'm talking about seeing, but as we go through the day, hearing the music we love, the sound of children playing at a playground, the various tastes that go through the day, the first sip of tea or coffee in the day, or eating and the kind of incredible richness of the experience of eating. And I don't want to spoil anybody's experience, but when I kind of first started to do this with a particular brand of what in England we call crisps, and in North America, I think you call chips. I really used to love these, and they were so Moorish. But when I really tried to appreciate them, I got really interested in that mixture of salt and fat and spices that kind of made up the flavor. And that morphed and it transformed and it became so interesting, and it kind of changed everything around that food, and it led to a different type of taste and a different kind of food. All I'm saying is the first part of this appreciation becoming a habit is just thinking about the myriad experiences of our day and the different senses that we have: seeing, hearing, tasting, walking through our day, the weather of our day, and that being an opportunity for the fabric of appreciation within a day. And what I'd like to do now is just use a three-step breathing space as a way of just dropping into this moment with a sense of opening to joy. So in step one of the breathing space, pausing and checking in. What's happening in my mind right now? What's happening in my body right now? And is there a word or two or a phrase that can summarize the quality of body, mind in this moment? Just see if you can have a sense of appreciation of how it is also just to gather the mind and now anchor somewhere in the body, the breath or somewhere else, and have a sense of, as we talked about in the last webinar, coming home to the body, anchoring and gathering and steadying, coming home to the body with that sense of appreciation of the body, that coming home and appreciation. And then in the third and final step of the three-step breathing space, just opening out to a broader awareness, the floodlight of this moment in the body and the mind. But also everything that's going to unfold in the moments that come. Chosen to tune in and be here now for this talk, for this webinar. Is it possible to open with a sense of curiosity, a sense of appreciation that can gladden the heart, brighten the mind, and have a sense of coming home to the body? So the three-step breathing space is part of the DNA of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And with this sense of appreciation, it's something that can be dropped into the day at moments where you might have a kind of intention to open a doorway to joy, a doorway to appreciation. It might be that you're waiting at the bus station or the airport for a family member to arrive for Christmas. Can you, in that moment, take a breathing space, open to that sense of anticipation, that sense of connection, that sense of reconnecting with someone that you love? And that can be throughout each day and every day. So the second thing I'd like to point to as this sort of sense of appreciation being a verb is the cultivation of joy. So William Blake, a kind of a poet and an artist and something of a kind of mystic, who in a moment of just surreptitious joy I was walking through a part of London the other day and walked into a park, and there was his grave. It was an absolute delight to come across the very part of London where William Blake had once lived and was now buried. Here is a quote from one of William Blake's poems. The tree which moves some to tears of joy is in the eyes of others only a green thing which stands in the way. The tree which moves some to tears of joy is in the eyes of others only a green thing which stands in the way. So what he's pointing to is this sense of the way we orient to something, the way we engage with it, the way we open to it really shapes our understanding of it, our relationship to it. Is it something joyful, the cultivation of joy, or is it in some sense an obstacle? I love the expression dance as if no one is watching. Maybe I love it particularly because I'm kind of English and it's a very un-English thing to do or think about. But when I'm dancing and music is on, sorry, when I'm cooking and music is on, I'll very often find myself, if the music is right, dancing, even if I'm here on my own. And my daughters used to find it extraordinary. They'd come into the kitchen to find me dancing and the music on too loud, and they'd sort of cringe with embarrassment. And I say, look, it's nothing to do with you. I'd do this even if you weren't around. I'm not sure they ever quite believe me. But there's something in this expression, right, of dancing as if no one is watching, of being unconstrained by rules and self-judgment and the judgment of others and being watched by others, and really just letting our body say, gosh, it feels like dancing, it feels like moving, it feels like being joyful, I guess. And I think there's something really at the heart of cultivating joy, of letting our experience be unfettered by all of those constraints, self-judgments and judgments of others. Of course, within the parameters of what is considered okay and acceptable in the society in which, of course, we live. And it's not a sentimentality. It's not talking or thinking or writing about joy, because in a way that is a way of moving away and thinking about and talking about and distancing ourselves from the experience. It's more about really being in and enjoying and savoring joy. The third way I'd like to just point to is the cultivation of gratitude. And it's interesting that gratitude has really become quite mainstream in terms of gratitude journals, but within the understanding of befriending and appreciation that Christina Feldman and I developed in our book, Mindfulness, Ancient Wisdom Meets Modern Psychology, gratitude is a facet of this larger family of what's called in Buddhist psychology the Brahma Viharas, and what we're describing as the attitudes of mindfulness, the kind of the shape or the attitudes that characterize our mind. But it's a really important dimension, not the only, but a really important dimension, because it nourishes and supports appreciation and joy. It doesn't deny difficulties, nor is it a kind of think positive or some kind of quick hack. It's about a pausing and stopping and asking, what is it that we can be thankful for in our lives? And within that is something really important. It's a reorientation. It's a very deliberate looking for and noting and recognition of what we can be thankful for, what we can be grateful for. And then the final thing that I'd like to point to is this idea of broadening and building appreciation. It's a sort of almost, and this will link with later webinars that I'll come to, it's a sort of stepping back and broadening and building our perspective. so that we can build appreciation, joy, and gratitude into our lives. And what I'd like to do is just to give voice now to one of the characters in the book. And in the audible version of the book, um, these characters are played by actors. And so, what I'd like to just play is a couple of minutes of a character called Sophia, who is a woman who's recently retired, describing this journey of broadening and building her appreciation in her life. So, just give me a moment. And while I take this moment, maybe just check in with your own body and mind while I find the link to this and share it. Got it? So I am going to just play this now, and I can see if I could, if you just let me know this is coming through okay.
A few years into retirement, I started to keep a diary on my bedside table, and each day I jotted down what I appreciated from the day. One New Year's Eve, I read back through all the entries, and some themes came up again and again. Making gifts for people I really care about, using my writing and craft skills, taking care of Noah, my grandson, my dog Rufus, walking him every day, his friendship and loyalty, meeting my boyfriend and getting to know each other, the growing intimacy and connection of physical intimacy, which, if I'm honest, I've missed so much since my husband died, cooking, especially for other people, taking a nap in the reclining lounger in my back garden in the sun, waking up and feeling a glow of being refreshed by a daytime nap. So my New Year's resolution was to build these into my days and weeks, to make them a central part of the fabric of my life. I know what you're thinking. New Year's resolutions don't work. But you'd be wrong here because it wasn't difficult. Who couldn't want to do things that bring joy into their life?
Appreciation is neither. So that's Sophia sharing her experience. And this particular facet that I wanted to just draw your attention to is this um, thing that she was doing because she's a more long-term practitioner now, where she's reviewing everything that's coming up for her when she thinks about building appreciation into her days and drawing out themes and making a deliberate choice to broaden and build appreciation, joy, and gratitude by building those things into her life. Time with her grandson, Noah, time in her garden, time with her new partner, Chris, knowing what it is that broadens and builds for her and choosing to build those into her life. I want to just finish this set of four with a story that I'm sorry it's slightly dark, but it feels, I don't know, quite thought-provoking actually. And it was something that came up. I was reading last night Elif Shafak's book, There Are Rivers in the Sky. And it speaks to this idea of the way in which we balance the appreciation in our everyday life, the cultivation of joy, the cultivation of gratitude, and this sense of broadening and building. So in the story goes something like this, that her brother buys her a fish, and she has this fish in a tank, and she thinks she loves having this fish, and she decides to call it love. But after a while, she thinks the fish looks a little lonely, and she decides to give it a friend. And she goes to the pet shop and buys another fish and puts it in the tank. And for a while, these two fish get along really well, and she calls the second fish Gratitude. But one morning, she comes down, and love is gone, and it seems that gratitude has eaten love. Now, I know that's a slightly dark story, and you're thinking, what's he saying? And I had to think about it really hard as well. And I think what she's talking about, which is something which is absolutely true with these attitudes of mind and the Brahmaviharas, whichever way you want to think about it, is it's quite a complex ecosystem. The way in which we balance a sense of love, a sense of appreciation, a sense of gratitude, they're kind of like a complex ecosystem where they all live in relation to one another. And we just have to watch how that is. The gratitude can easily move into sentimentality, and that can eat love. And this is a practice, this is a dance, and one in which we can very easily, I think, potentially get in our own way. But what I think is beautiful about this work, and this is one of the things I really learned from my friend and colleague, Christina Feldman, is that what arises out of this work, out of this cultivation, is contentment. And contentment is different to joy, it's different to happiness. It's more of a resting in our experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the stories, the judgment, the pleasant and the unpleasant, with a sense of steadiness and contentment. And I'd like to just invite you just to consider this question. And it's a question that is quite a rich exploration. When you stop and pause to really just rest in this moment, and by this moment, I mean this moment right here, right now, what else do you need to be at ease, to be contented in this moment? If you really stop and rest in this moment, is there anything missing? Is there anything that you need to be at ease? And in a sense, this exploration is an exploration in contentment, because the moment we do that, there's an opportunity to just rest and be with the whole myriad of what's happening in our body and mind in the outside world, which will inevitably have elements of pleasant and unpleasant, lovely and difficult. But the mind can kick in and say, yes, but if this or that or whatever. And that introduces, I think, powerfully the way in which, as Thich Nhat Hanh said, peace is one breath away. But our own ability to sabotage our own peace is also illustrated with this practice. Jean Sonoda Boland put it this way: when you recover or discover something that nourishes your soul and brings joy, care enough about yourself to make room for it in your life. Let me just read that again. When you recover or discover something that nourishes your soul and brings joy, care enough about yourself to make room for it in your life. And that's really been the theme of everything I've said so far, that we stop and look, we see what brings a sense of appreciation, a sense of joy, a sense of gratitude, a sense of contentment. So let's make room for it. Let's be true enough to ourselves to make that decision, to make space for it in our lives. And in a way, if joy feels good, and gratitude feels good, and connection feels good, and we know that it resources us, as Sophia said in that extract, it's not difficult, actually. It's not like some kind of New Year's resolution that is really challenging. Other things that we'll experience are stories and narratives as we do this. I don't deserve to be happy. Somebody else deserves this more than I. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. And these are all ways in which it's really easy for us to get in our own way, to be obstacles. And then finally, on this topic of obstacles, again, because of my work with a clinical background, but of course my experience, and I suspect many people's experience, is there is a sort of natural and really very understandable tendency for the mind to skate over the good, a bit like ice, like a layer of ice that sits over the good, and we just skate over the top of it. In extremis, in depression, this is what's called anhedonia, an inability to feel anything actually, let alone pleasure. In anxiety, anxiety can kind of leach because of the worry and the kind of threat, it can leach a sense of pleasure out of life. And the way one person described this to me, or I saw this written about somewhere, I can't remember now, was like beginning to engage with these appreciation practices was like putting the word appreciation into Google and absolutely it says no results. But what was interesting about her experience was she said, okay, so there's no results, but what Google very helpfully did for me was underneath it said, try these search terms. And they were more subtle and they were more everyday. And when she did that, she was able to find the beginnings of appreciation practice. So it's not a quick fix. It's not a thinking exercise. It's not a life hack. And when we do this work, we inevitably meet obstacles. So just by way of kind of closing, what I'd like to suggest is that appreciation at this sort of top level is a whole way of being, a whole way of living in a spirit of carpe diem, in the small moments of our day, perhaps meeting them with a three-step breathing space, either formally or very quickly and intuitively, but also in the important moments of our lives. When something good happens, orienting to it, grounding, recognizing, allowing, savoring. When we meet a barrier, seeing that as we talk about in mindfulness work, as seeing it as a sort of veil that if we look closely and we stay with it, we can move the veil a little bit to one side and see what we discover, see what we find. I asked my friend Katie this quite challenging question. This was the nurse, the palliative care nurse. I said, you know, when you sit with people towards the end of their life and you're helping them in that last part of their life, I know sometimes you've said that they ask whether or not they can be, you know, there's this question of euthanasia or assisted suicide. And I said, would you ever choose that for yourself? And she said, no, because even in the midst of the end of life when things can be really not very pleasant at all, I've seen too many moments of love and transcendence. I wouldn't want to deny myself those experiences. And that's a kind of example, I think, of finding beauty in the muddle, really being not some simple thing, but really something quite profound, something quite powerful. So just by way of closing, I'd like to close with the sort of invitation for some reflections. When you reflect on your life, what are the themes that bring you joy, thankfulness, and contentment? As Sophia did when she pulled out those kind of meta themes. What are the themes for you? If you had to do a top 5 sources of joy, what would they be? What would it look like and what would it mean to schedule those into your life? What 5 people are most important to your sense of belonging, contentment, meaning? What places, what activities do you, like all of us, get in your own way? What would it mean to get out of our own way, to make space and time for joy, as we saw with that quote? So I want to just end with a quote which I've actually changed around a little bit, and I hope you'll excuse me doing this. It's from an 8th century Buddhist monk and scholar, Shanti Deva, and it's I've changed it around because I want to point to where these webinars are going. and where everything that we've talked about so far, the building blocks of where it's going. So to paraphrase Shantideva, by caring for ourselves, we're also caring for the world around us. By caring for others in the world, we're also caring for ourselves. How does looking after ourselves help others? Well, by growing qualities like joy, gratitude, and contentment, befriending our body and mind. How does looking after others and the world help us? Well, by contributing to a community built on kindness, compassion, and love. So it's pointing this idea of the inner work we do resources our outer lives, and our outer lives also in turn resources and enriches our inner lives. Thank you very much for your attention.